Hello and thank you for joining us on the Capitol Report. I'm Steve Lance, and let's take a look at some of the stories we've been covering for you today. The Biden administration celebrated a small victory with the passing of a record $1.2 trillion spending bill for infrastructure. We speak to Congressman Kevin Hern, who says that much of that spending is not going to be directed to hard infrastructure projects. And Congressman Buddy Carter is a fully vaccinated member of the Doctors Caucus. The congressman says that vaccines are safe and effective, but that mandating them for children is crossing the line. And with the vaccine mandates coming from all different directions, we speak to the attorney who just successfully filed a motion to halt the Biden administration's mandate in the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. He says this could be elevated to the Supreme Court. President Biden will sign the bipartisan infrastructure bill into law on Monday. The White House will invite members of Congress for the ceremony. The House passed the bill last week. Over $1 trillion will be used to improve highways, broadband, and other infrastructure. Biden declared that the spending from the bill would help curb inflation. The consumer prices in October climbed over 6% from just a year ago. During remarks at the Baltimore port, Biden acknowledged prices remain too high.
COVID-19 has stretched global supply chains like never before, and suddenly, when you go to order a pair of sneakers or a bicycle or Christmas presents for the family, you're met with higher prices and long delays, or they say they just don't have any at all.
Biden also said the infrastructure spending would create jobs paying $45 an hour, and most wouldn't require college degrees. With President Biden set to sign his record-spending infrastructure bill into law on Monday, we speak with Congressman Kevin Hern to find out where some of this taxpayer money will be spent. Congressman Kevin Hern, thank you for joining us on the Capitol Report.
Great to be with you, Steve.
Now, I'd like to ask you about the recently passed infrastructure bill. How much of this bill was actually devoted to typical infrastructure projects, such as repairing roads and bridges?
Well, if you look at the total cost of the bill, $1.2 trillion, about $110 billion to your traditional roads and bridges. And if you look at the modern day infrastructure of, broadband of $65 billion, so we're going to get up somewhere around $200 billion in a $1.2 trillion bill. So somewhere less than 20% is the traditional infrastructure. But really what this bill is it's a Green New Deal bill with a little bit of infrastructure thrown in. When you look at all of the money set aside to go and benefit climate change initiatives, electric vehicle initiatives, this is really a sad day for America that we take something that's necessary to protect the infrastructure of our country and we make it so partisan under this president and Speaker Pelosi and Schumer. It's just a sad day in America. And for somebody that spent 5 years on a Turnpike Authority as the Finance Committee chair, I speak from a position of I know what I'm talking about. And it's just a sad day that we see this kind of waste of American taxpayer dollars.
Now let's talk about where the rest of this money might be going. What are some of the other programs funded through this bill that Americans normally don't think of when you're thinking of an infrastructure bill?
Well, I think one of the things you look at that's really going to really excite people in a negative way is some $400 or $500 million is going to be spent across the 50 states on going and monitoring people's travel behaviors to see if there's a way to pay based on you reporting from the moment you leave your door till you go to your destination of what taxing authorities should be paid for or paid to based on how you drive. And can you imagine that if you're in an urban area versus a rural area like much of my state is, my rural farmers and people who live out in the country and decide they want to live that way are going to be monitored to a place that they're used to wanting their freedoms, and they're going to be monitored now by the big government, by Big Brother. And again, one of the things that's really crazy about this is you see things in there where there's a few billion. Today you talk about billions like they're insignificant, but billions to, quote, tear up racist highways and rebuild them. I didn't know that highways had a personality, but I guess we're learning from the socialist Democrats of what we have now are racist highways. We're also talking about certain levels of diversity and gender correct people working on roads and bridges and highways. Again, I didn't know that was an issue, but that's something that if you're going to be funded at the state level by the federal government, you have to make sure that you go through your roster and you have the right people working to do this. This is insane what we're doing today.
Now, you just touched on it. How important do you think it is that the American people pay attention to what is actually going into these bills?
Well, I think it's gravely important, but what's happened since COVID started, and there's been some $7.5 trillion of money spent. If you remember, just about 13, 14 years ago in the financial crisis, there was a huge issue with us spending $700 billion to say, I wasn't in Congress then, but that was the big talk of the town, is that we're spending $700 billion to right our economy after the financial crisis. And now we've spent over $7.5 trillion. And the sad thing about this infrastructure bill, if we go back to December of 2015, and you look at all the headlines then talked about the largest infrastructure bill in the history of this country. It was $305 billion. And here, less than 6 years later, we're talking about a $1.2 trillion, quote, infrastructure bill that Speaker Pelosi, the Socialist Democrats, and even the moderate Democrats in the Senate and the President have said at the end of the day has to be bundled up with a $5 trillion human infrastructure bill.
We've been hearing that this bill, once implemented, will cost significantly more than the $1.2 trillion price tag once everything is said and done. What are the actual costs?
Well, it's gimmickry. It's not what the American people do. They know if they're told they have to spend money on certain things, they go spend it. Here, in order for this to work and to, quote, score with the Congressional Budget Office, they start projects later, have them be shortened so that they don't score as high, so that there's actually paying through taxpayer dollars and recapturing money that was set aside for COVID. But I will tell you that even when they do that, the Congressional Budget Office says that we're going to be close to $300 billion additional debt over the 10-year period scoring window. So even though they're saying it's paid for, it's not, much like what's going to be said about the reconciliation bill, that it will be paid for, that it will cost nothing. It will cost American taxpayers trillions of dollars in taxes, and it'll cost their kids and grandkids monies like we've never seen before now that the cap's been removed on the debt ceiling.
Congressman Kevin Hern, thank you.
Thanks. Great to be with you.
The White House estimates nearly 1 million children under the age of 12 have received the COVID-19 vaccine. However, some Virginia parents are worried that the kids may have received a wrong vaccine dosage. On Wednesday, the Loudoun County Health Department sent a letter to parents informing them that a local pharmacy may have given the kids a wrong dosage of the COVID-19 vaccine. Children between the ages 5 and 11 are supposed to receive a smaller dosage of the adult vaccine. The name of the pharmacy in question is called TED Pharmacy, which will no longer be allowed to distribute the vaccine. In Maryland, according to the state's data, about 15% of all CCP virus cases since January were of fully vaccinated individuals, and that number may reflect lower because of the fewer amount of people who were actually vaccinated earlier in the year. According to the Maryland Department of Health, between January and November, there have been over 32,000 CCP virus cases among fully vaccinated residents in the state of Maryland. And of those cases, 300 fully vaccinated people have died. The CCP virus is the virus which causes COVID-19. Our next guest is Georgia Congressman Buddy Carter. A member of the Doctors Caucus, Congressman Carter is a pharmacist who also participated himself in the clinical trials for the COVID-19 vaccine. Yet he is speaking out against the mandates. Congressman Carter, thank you so much for joining us on the Capitol Report.
Thank you for having me.
Now, Congressman, I know I sound like a broken record here, but when it comes to the vaccine mandates, we've come a long way in just a few short months from when even Dr. Fauci, President Biden, and the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, were all saying that this was unconstitutional and wouldn't be doable. How did we get here, and is there a solution to stop these mandates?
Well, there is a solution. The mandates are unconstitutional, and we are going to be taking that to the courts if we need to, if they don't stop them. Let me preface my remarks by saying that I'm a strong advocate for the vaccine. I believe that vaccines are the single most life-saving innovations in the history of medicine, and I believe that this vaccine is safe and effective, so much so that I went through the clinical trials myself. I felt like it was important to set a good example as a member of Congress, as a member of the Doctors Caucus. I've had the booster and everything. However, whether you get the vaccine or not should be a decision that is made between you and your physician, you and your pharmacist, you and your family member, not between you and the government. The government should not be mandating that you get a vaccine.
So it appears that the kids are next on the chopping block. What are parents in your district saying?
I'm hearing from parents, they're calling the office, I'm talking to them, and they're telling me, look, first of all, this is not a childhood disease. It doesn't impact children. We all of us know that. Not only that, but it's untested in children. We had an advisor to the FDA make a very poor remark, an awful remark that we had to inject it into children's arms in order to find out what the side effects would be. Well, that's not going to make any mama bear feel good.
Now, Congressman, I want to get your thoughts on inflation. 6.2% in the month of October. This is the highest in over 30 years. What does this mean for everyday Americans?
It's going to be tough. It's going to be a tough Thanksgiving. Let me tell you, we already know the price of turkeys are up 27%. The price of pumpkin pie at Costco, one of our favorites, is up 17%. All of it is having an impact on everyday Americans. And that's what we have to keep in mind, is that when you talk about inflation, you're talking about the middle class, you're talking about the working class.
In your district, the Port of Savannah is home to the 4th largest shipping port in the nation. What have you been hearing about the supply chain, and is it hitting the state of Georgia?
We've got ships that are anchored offshore that are backing up. Joe Biden finally got his boat parade. Unfortunately, it's not what he was trying to. This is not what he wanted, but it's a result of the policies. Look, elections have consequences. Policies have consequences. And what we're seeing here is the consequences of the policies of this administration. We do have supply chain issues. It has to be addressed. We need truck drivers. We need trucks. That's where the bottleneck is really in the supply chain at the ports right now. And until we address that, we're going to see higher prices in all of these goods. And again, that adds to inflation. It fuels inflation.
Congressman Buddy Carter, thank you.
Thank you.
On Wednesday, 10 Republican state attorneys general sued to stop the Biden administration's requirement that millions of U.S. healthcare workers get vaccinated against the CCP virus. They argued that it would worsen already depleted staffing shortages. The lawsuit was filed in the U.S. District Court for the Eastern District of Missouri. The healthcare worker mandate does not include a testing opt-out, and it applies to over 17 million nurses and other medical workers. The coalition says the mandate is unlawful under federal law. The Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals has issued a stay on the Biden administration's OSHA vaccine mandate on private sector employees. We had a chance to speak with the general counsel at the Texas Public Policy Foundation, attorney Robert Hennicky. Mr. Hennicky is the person who filed the emergency motion to stay in the Fifth Circuit. Here's what he had to say. Robert Hennicky, thank you so much for joining us on the Capitol Report.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Now, Robert, you actually filed the emergency motion to stay with regard to the Biden administration's vaccine mandate for private employees in the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, I believe. Tell us a little bit about that and what grounds you filed that motion on.
Well, the claim by the Biden administration that they could require private citizens against their will to undergo a medical procedure is chilling, it's tyrannical, and it's unprecedented. It's also unconstitutional. And so when we, through the Texas Public Policy Foundation, filed our lawsuits on Friday, we challenged the vaccine mandate on constitutional grounds, that the Constitution did not grant the federal government the power to do this. And thankfully, the Fifth Circuit on an emergency basis agreed and immediately stepped in to say the unconstitutional vaccine mandate.
Now, do you ever get concerned going into cases like this that the decision that the judges make could be political, and if it's, if their views are not in line with, the Constitution or things like that, that it might go the other direction?
I think there's, in certain jurisdictions, you've certainly seen, judges that are driven by ideology or seem to themselves want to be super legislators. But, the vast majority of judges on the federal courts and especially with many of the great jurists that were appointed during the Trump administration, have really proven their commitment to the United States Constitution and to the text of the law, and in applying that faithfully to get to the outcome, not that they would personally choose, but that the law commands. And where we have judges who do their job in discharging their duties to be faithful to the text of the Constitution, we get to the right outcome, the just outcome, and the lawful outcome.
Now, do you see a path where this will eventually go to the Supreme Court and basically be once and for all?
I think it could. I think the question is when and how fast. I know that the Fifth Circuit is working with urgency because I think that they see, especially as we roll into the Thanksgiving and the Christmas season, the concern that this unconstitutional policy is causing. And so, I expect the Fifth Circuit to act on an expedited basis to make permanent the stay of the private employer vaccine mandate. I certainly expect from there that the Biden administration and the Department of Justice will try to appeal that to the United States Supreme Court. But I think in this instance, I think it's just widely recognized that the Biden administration is acting unlawfully. And the only reason why the Supreme Court would step in would be if they were going to reverse that. And I don't believe that they would. I don't believe the votes are there. So, my expectation is that we'll win at the appellate court, the government will appeal to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court will deny any kind of emergency review, and instead will let the legal issues play out during the normal course of litigation.
Robert Henneke, thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
YouTube has admitted that it acted incorrectly when it removed a video of a speech given by Congressman Darrell Issa, where he criticizes Russia's Sputnik V vaccine rollout. In a statement to the Washington Times on Wednesday, YouTube said, "We sometimes make mistakes, and when flagged, we work as quickly as possible to address it." YouTube did not elaborate on why the video of Issa was removed. In a tweet earlier this month, Issa called out YouTube for allegedly censoring his comments. And coming up, the pandemic has pushed the government to inject trillions of dollars into the economy. And now the government is on track to spend trillions more for infrastructure, social welfare, and climate change. How will this massive government spending impact already skyrocketing inflation? And a majority of Americans believe that Facebook makes American society worse. This, according to a recent CNN poll. And while talking about defending Taiwan, Secretary of State Antony Blinken says that the U.S. and its allies would take action if China were to use force to disrupt the independent island. The government has injected a total of around $4 trillion into the economy for COVID relief and is now on track to spend another $3 trillion with Biden's newly passed infrastructure bill and Biden's Build Back Better plan that could pass before Christmas. How does this government spending impact inflation? NTD's Melina Wisecup reports.
The money supply has expanded by $6 trillion since January of 2020. In March of 2020, $2 trillion in COVID relief. Then another stimulus package just 1 year later. Now on to the next trillion, the infrastructure bill.
This is a lot of spending that's going on now in a short period of time. So this is, I think it's unprecedented.
Are there signs that indicates that it is or is not transitory?
When they say it's transitory, I always think, well, that makes it a transition, but what is it a transition to? Maybe even higher inflation? I think it's not transitory. I think we're going to see a long-run inflation. And that's because, first of all, I don't see the Federal Reserve has continued to expand the money supply. And we also see the government spending continuing to increase. And so long as that goes on, I don't see any, I think it's likely that we're going to see more inflation. Lawrence Summers, who was, of course, Harvard professor, economist, and an advisor both to President Clinton and President Obama, has said that he's worried they've already begun to lose control of inflation.
What signs tell you that?
I think the fact that, first of all, every inflation forecast that the federal government has been giving us recently has turned out to be way too low. Inflation is about double what they were predicting it would be. I don't think that they're predicting this correctly. I think they have starting to lose control.
After months of insisting costs will go down, Biden now calling higher prices worrisome.
Everything from a gallon of gas to a loaf of bread costs more, and it's worrisome, even though wages are going up.
This comes as the president is prepared to sign the $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill, while at the same time pushing for another $1.75 trillion to spend. But he says it will be fully paid for through getting the wealthier Americans to pay what he calls their fair share in taxes.
And you cannot balance the budget by raising taxes. If you raise taxes, and if it gets more revenue, which it might not, because it discourages economic activity, you might actually get less. If the government does raise more revenue, what happens is Congress then says, well, we've got more revenue, and they find new spending for it.
Republicans and Democrats historically have wasted money. I believe we ought to have a balanced budget.
Senator Rick Scott ready to join all Republicans in the Senate in opposing the next spending bill, leaving no margin for error for lead Democrats. Democrat Senator Joe Manchin raising eyebrows with a tweet. Americans know the inflation tax is real, and D.C. can no longer ignore the economic pain Americans feel every day.
So these recent comments by Senator Manchin really begs the question of if he's second-guessing his yes vote for this second spending bill, and if he'll try to withhold the vote on this bill, at least until the economy shows signs of stabilizing or inflation isn't hitting Americans' pocketbooks as hard as it is right now. Steve?
On Veterans Day, the White House announced new resources for veterans exposed to environmental hazards. The VA would develop a testing model to determine if chronic conditions, including rare respiratory and lung cancers, were related to toxic exposure. President Biden has previously said that burn pits where waste is incinerated might have been responsible for the brain cancer that killed his son Beau, an Iraq War veteran. Congressman Greg Murphy reintroduced a bipartisan bill to confront the opioid crisis in the veteran community. Murphy, a physician, said that veterans are disproportionately affected by the opioid epidemic. His bill mandates a review of veteran deaths from opioids. It also directs the Secretary of Veterans Affairs to outline national efforts to tackle the opioid crisis and to publish recommendations for improving the safety and well-being of veterans. According to a recent CNN poll, over 3/4 of Americans believe Facebook is making society worse. The poll indicates that the vast majority of those sampled believe that Facebook harms society, with 75% saying the company is harmful. Among those who think Facebook is a problem, 55% say it is because of the way people use the platform, while 45% believe it is due to how Facebook is run. Facebook is now under intense scrutiny from Congress over claims that its platform helped divide Americans and drives the spread of fake information. At the same time, the platform has come under fire for its role in censoring free speech of those with dissenting voices that differ from the company's liberal culture. Internet giants, including social media apps Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and Snapchat, were joined by some world leaders to issue a global call to better protect children at a summit in Paris Thursday. The call was initiated by France and the UN Child Protection Agency. It acknowledges that in the digital environment, children can come across harmful and violent content. About 30 heads of state and government, including U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris, participated in the event. The United States and its allies would take action if China were to use force over Taiwan. This coming from Secretary of State Antony Blinken. Secretary Blinken was asked whether the U.S. would step in to defend Taiwan if it were to be attacked by China.
We're not alone in this determination to make sure that we preserve peace and stability in that part of the world. There are many countries, both in the region and beyond, that would see any unilateral action to use force to disrupt the status quo as a significant threat to peace and security, and they too would take action in the event that happened.
He said that Washington's role is to make sure that the island has the means to defend itself as is required by U.S. law. His remarks came ahead of a planned virtual meeting between Biden and Chinese Communist Party leader Xi Jinping. Asked if the meeting would happen next week, Blinken only replied that it was coming soon, but did not give more details. China is stepping up military pressure on Taiwan. Last month, Taiwan's defense minister warned that the Chinese regime will be capable of mounting a full-scale invasion of the self-ruled island by 2025. Biden caused a stir last month when he said that the U.S. would come to Taiwan's defense if China were to attack. The White House quickly said that Biden was not signaling a change in policy. However, some analysts believe his comments were intended to be perceived as they were. And that's all we have for you on the Capitol Report today. Thank you for tuning in. I'm your host, Steve Lance. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you next time.